When I think about the first time my sister told me I'd never amount to anything, I can still feel the cold sting of her words pressing into the back of my neck like a blade I didn't know how to pull out. My name is Kala Whitaker, though back then that name meant nothing. Not to me, not to her, not to anyone. I was 23, living in a matchbox apartment that leaked heat like a cracked teapot. I'd spent the last of my college savings on a battered secondhand laptop and a stack of books that smelled like mold and broken promises. Alina, my sister, was always better at making things look easy. She had a smile that could sell lies for a living, and maybe she did. Back then, she had just married Nathan Brandt, the heir to Brandt Industrial Holdings, the conglomerate that owned half the warehouses that lined our town's dying port. The same town that had once tried to break me, chew me up into something useful, something quiet. I wasn't useful. Or quiet. I think that's why Alina hated me the most. She came by that day unannounced. I remember the smell of her perfume. Something flowery and sweet, too expensive for my cracked linoleum floors. She brought a bottle of white wine, and that husband of hers. Nathan stood in my doorway like he was inspecting something broken in his factory. Eyes narrowed. Polite smile stretched too thin. "Kala," she said, breezing past him. "You need to get your life together. You're embarrassing us." I didn't answer. I was trying to get my freelance project off the ground. Web design for tiny local shops too stubborn to shut down. No one wanted to pay me more than a pittance, but it was mine. It was the first thing that was mine since Dad died. Nathan cleared his throat. "Your sister's just worried about you. Maybe you should apply at Brandt. We always need receptionists. A steady paycheck, health insurance." I remember laughing. Not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh, I'd cry. "You think I want to sit behind a glass desk telling old men where the bathroom is?" Alina clicked her tongue, took a sip of wine she hadn't offered me. "God, you're so stubborn. You'll never amount to anything this way, Kala. You're wasting your potential." She didn't even know what my potential was. Neither did I. But I knew it didn't fit behind that glass desk. They left that afternoon with my only bottle of wine half empty, and my heart cracked wide open. That night, I sat on my fraying sofa and built the first version of my site from scratch. I named it Thorn and Thread, a small name, like a weed no one bothers to rip out of the garden. It was ugly, it was fragile, but it was mine. Months passed. I worked until dawn some nights, my fingers aching from typing. I learned how to pitch clients, how to talk to people who thought they were better than me. I learned how to make my voice sound steady when my bank account was anything but. My landlord pounded on my door for rent I paid in scraped-together quarters. I ate discount ramen until my stomach cramped. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. But then, something shifted. My first big client, a boutique eco-brand from Portland, hired me to revamp their online store. They paid me enough to fix my laptop, pay rent on time, and buy a desk chair that didn't creak every time I moved. I cried when I deposited that check. I remember thinking, maybe Alina's wrong. Maybe I can do this. I didn't see my sister for 2 years after that visit. She'd send the occasional text, passive-aggressive reminders that Mom was asking about me, that Nathan's company was booming, that she'd bought another house by the lake. I'd reply with short, polite lies. "I'm good. Busy. Working. Hope you're well." Thorn and Thread grew like that weed. Unnoticed, stubborn, wild. Word of mouth was a funny thing. Small businesses told other small businesses. One boutique turned into 5 into 20. I hired my first contractor, Miriam, a single mom from Manchester who could code circles around me and was grateful for the flexible hours. Then came Jamie, a branding genius with more piercings than I had shoes. I liked my team. We were misfits, the ones no one thought would get far. We made each other strong. I was 30 when Alina invited me to her birthday party. 7 years since that afternoon in my apartment. The invitation was embossed on expensive cream cardstock, like a wedding, except worse. I almost threw it away. But something inside me, a flicker of the old pain, told me to go. I bought a dress I couldn't really afford, and a bottle of wine twice as expensive as the one she'd stolen. I drove up to their mansion on the hill. 5 bedrooms, manicured lawns, security gate like a prison for rich people. I parked my second-hand hatchback next to a line of black SUVs and walked up the stone path like I belonged there. She opened the door herself. Her eyes flicked up and down my outfit, calculating. "You came," she said, surprised. "Happy birthday," I told her, pushing the wine into her hands. Inside, it was the same old circle of people. Nathan's colleagues, investors, trust fund heirs. They talked about supply chain disruptions and market expansions over tiny plates of sushi. I lingered by the window, pretending to check my phone. The one person I didn't expect to find staring at me was Nathan. He cornered me in the hallway by the guest bathroom. His cologne made me nauseous. "I hear you're running a little agency now. What's it called? Thorn and something?" "Thorn and Thread," I said, my voice calm. "Yes." He leaned closer. I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Interesting name. You know, we've been looking for a fresh rebrand, something to make us look more ethical. Younger. Maybe you should pitch us sometime." I wanted to laugh in his face, but I didn't. "You think I'd work for you?" He smiled, all teeth. "Everything's for sale, Calla. Even you." I left the party early, my head spinning. I sat in my car for an hour, watching the lights in their windows flicker off one by one. Nathan didn't know it yet, but he'd made a mistake that night. He'd handed me the seed of something bigger. He'd given me the push I didn't know I needed. Thorn and Thread wasn't for sale. Not yet. But I knew I'd make it worth buying. So expensive they'd choke on the offer. I started sleeping less, working more. I landed 2 new clients the next month. Tech startups with deep pockets who wanted the authentic touch. I made sure our name was on every piece of branding. I made sure people knew who built their sites, who made their sales skyrocket. I didn't hide anymore. I went to networking events, gave talks at small business incubators, mentored other women who'd been told they'd never be enough. The more we grew, the more I thought about Alina's words. Never amount to anything. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd never amount to anything they could understand. But I'd amount to something on my own terms. Then, one rainy Thursday, an email landed in my inbox. Subject line: Brandt Holdings Acquisition Inquiry. I read it 3 times before my hands started shaking. Nathan's company, Alina's company, wanted to buy Thorn and Thread. They didn't just want my work. They wanted my name. My team. My stubborn little weed. I sat back in my chair and laughed until I cried. They thought they could swallow me whole. They had no idea who I'd become. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The moment I closed that email, I felt something inside me settle into place. A cold, quiet resolve I hadn't known I was capable of. I stared at Nathan's name in the signature line, his title in bold, the polite corporate language designed to look like an olive branch instead of a leash. I reread the offer. They wanted Thorn and Thread for less than I'd made in the last quarter. An insult disguised as an opportunity. I didn't reply right away. I needed them to sweat. More importantly, I needed to see Alina's face when she realized her husband was the one now knocking on my door. I called an emergency meeting with my team that night. It was already late, but Jamie and Miriam logged in with their bleary eyes and mugs of cold coffee. I laid out the email on screen share, watching their reactions. Jamie snorted, a ring of smoke curling up from his vape pen. "They're out of their minds," he said. "They think they can lowball you because we're small." "Are we small?" I asked. I needed to hear it from someone else's mouth. Miriam shook her head. "No, we're lean. That's different. We're good because we're lean. They don't get that." I leaned back in my chair. The window behind me rattled with the wind, the rain splattering against the glass. For a moment, I thought about my father's voice, how he used to tell me to stand up straight when people tried to look down on me. "Then we make them get it," I said. We spent the next few weeks doing what we did best, working like wolves in the dark. I reached out to every client we'd ever served. I asked for testimonials, case studies, social proof. Jamie redesigned our pitch deck overnight. Slick, honest, rebellious. Miriam ran the numbers, showed me where we could scale, where we could invest. The more we built our defense, the clearer the truth became. Thorn and Thread wasn't a buyout target. It was a threat. 2 days after I read Nathan's email, Alina called me. I was in the middle of rewriting copy for a skincare brand in Sweden when her name popped up. For a second, I thought about letting it ring, but curiosity won. "Hello?" I said, pretending I didn't know who it was. "Calla." Her voice was tight, clipped. "Nathan said you got an email from him. He was trying to do you a favor. He thinks you're in over your head." I laughed. I couldn't help it. A favor? Alina, your husband wants to eat my company alive and spit out the bones. Tell him I'm not interested. Her breath caught on the other end. She'd always hated when I didn't play along. Don't be stupid. This is your chance to finally make something of yourself. You'd be set for life. I felt the old rage flare up in my chest. No, I'd be working for you, again. You can keep your pity. And your offer? Before she could answer, I hung up. I sat there, breathing hard, my heart hammering. I wanted to scream. Instead, I went back to work. My code editor was safer than my thoughts. A week later, Nathan himself called. He didn't bother with small talk. You're making a mistake, Kala. You're too small to keep up. The market will eat you alive. I pictured him in his corner office with the city skyline behind him, so sure the world bent to his will. If you're so sure of that, I said, why are you trying to buy me? He didn't have an answer. After that, things got ugly. One of our biggest clients, an artisanal food delivery startup, pulled out of their contract without warning. Their CEO wouldn't answer my calls. I found out later Nathan's company had offered them a, quote, strategic partnership in exchange for dropping us. He was playing dirty. I should have expected it, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. I called an all-hands meeting. The mood was heavy, but no one flinched. Miriam spoke up first. We can't let them see us bleed. We need to move faster. Jamie nodded. We'll get new clients. Better ones. Screw Brandt Holdings. They're old, we're new. That scares them. And it did. I could feel it every time Nathan left another message, each one more desperate than the last. They needed my reputation, my grit, my story. They needed my fight because they'd forgotten how to fight themselves. I started doing interviews, small podcasts, indie business blogs. I told our story without bitterness, but with teeth. I told people what it was like to be told you'd never amount to anything. How that became fuel. How our little agency was proof that you didn't need a fancy office or a trust fund to make something that mattered. One morning, I woke up to an email from a major online magazine. They'd read my story on a business blog and wanted to do a feature. I stared at that email for a long time. Then I called Miriam. They want to talk to me. Big piece, our whole journey. Do it, she said. They want you to inspire people? Inspire them. Just don't let them rewrite you. So I told my story. Our story. I talked about the nights I ate stale bread so I could pay Miriam and Jamie on time. About the days I wondered if Alina had been right. I talked about the loneliness and the triumph. I didn't hold back. When the article went live, everything exploded. We got more project inquiries in 3 days than we'd gotten in 6 months. Suddenly, I wasn't the girl in the Matchbox apartment anymore. I was an example. A beacon. Maybe even a threat. I got another email from Nathan. This time, the subject line was just one word. Please. I didn't answer. I knew it was petty, but God, it felt good. It wasn't all victory laps. Our servers crashed twice that week. Jamie pulled 3 all-nighters to keep the site live. Miriam had to turn away clients we couldn't handle. Growth was chaos, and I felt like I was running on adrenaline alone. But every night, when I lay in bed, I could feel that seed inside me sprouting into something strong and unkillable. Alina texted me again. No pleasantries, no passive aggression. Just, we need to talk. So I agreed. We met at a little cafe on the edge of downtown, neutral ground. She was already there when I arrived, sunglasses perched on her head, tapping her manicured nails on the table. She didn't bother with small talk. Nathan's furious with you. He says you're embarrassing him. I ordered a coffee and stirred in sugar I didn't need. Good. Her eyes narrowed. You think you're so clever. But you can't keep this up. You're one bad quarter away from being nothing again. I leaned in. Funny. That's what you said when you took my last bottle of wine. For a moment, her mask slipped. I saw the fear under all that polished disdain. She was afraid because she couldn't control me anymore. She pushed a folder across the table. I didn't touch it. It's another offer, she said. More money, equity. You'd be an executive. Safe. I let out a laugh so sharp it turned heads. Safe? You want me in a gilded cage, Alina. You can keep it. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Maybe she was. Why are you doing this? Just take the money. I stood up, my coffee barely touched. Because you told me I'd never amount to anything. And now you're here, begging me to sell. Think about that the next time you wonder what I'm worth. I left her there with her untouched latte and her folder of empty promises. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I'd never sell them my soul. I walked out into the cold, the wind biting my cheeks, and for the first time, I felt free. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The wind that afternoon stung my eyes as I stepped away from the cafe and left Alina sitting alone with her folder of hollow promises. My feet carried me nowhere in particular. Just away. Away from her words, away from Nathan's shadow, away from the small, scared version of myself I used to be. I found myself at the pier, the one where Dad used to take me when I was a kid. Back then, the docks were busy. Fishermen mending nets, seagulls screaming overhead, the air thick with the smell of salt and diesel. Now it was mostly empty, just a few rusted boats swaying in the gray water, paint peeling from the pylons like old scabs. I stood at the edge and let the cold bite into my skin. The phone in my pocket buzzed again and again. Nathan's number, a couple from Alina, one from a journalist who'd read the feature and wanted a follow-up. My inbox was a war zone of opportunity and threats. I knew I should care about each call, each message, each next chess move. But in that moment, all I wanted was the quiet. I thought about Dad. He'd hated conflict, hated raising his voice. But the few times he'd gotten truly angry, it was like watching a tide roll in. Slow, unstoppable, swallowing everything in its path. He'd always told me, "Don't shout, Kala. Show." I had been showing. They just didn't see the whole picture yet. When I got home, I found Miriam waiting for me on video call. She looked tired, her hair scraped back in a messy bun. She was holding her baby on one hip, bouncing him gently as he fussed. "Sorry for dragging you in after hours," I said. "How's Eli?" She shrugged. "Teething. He'll survive." "So where do we stand?" The client poaches confirmed. "Nathan's people are pushing hard. Jamie's working on a counter-narrative for our socials. And you look like you just walked out of a storm." I laughed. Feels like I did. She squinted at me. "What's your play, Kala? Because they're not going to stop. They're going to keep chipping away. Nathan wants to break you so he can buy you cheap." I felt that ember inside me spark again. "Then we make it too expensive to touch." I called Jamie next. He answered on the third ring, bleary-eyed and surrounded by takeout containers and half-finished mock-ups. "I've got an idea," I said. "Remember that grant program we talked about?" He sat up straighter. "For small businesses?" "Yeah, we start now. No more talking. We put 10% of last quarter's profits into microgrants for local shops. Real places, family-owned, struggling but fighting. We take the money Nathan wants to bury us with, and we feed it back to the roots." Jamie's grin was sharp as a knife. "A PR nightmare for them. Makes them look like corporate vultures while we're out here funding the little guy." "Not just PR. It's the right thing to do," I said, my voice steady. "It's how we grow without losing what makes us different." The next week was a blur. We launched the Thorn Fund with a website built overnight, a video shot in my living room on a borrowed camera. I sat on my threadbare sofa, telling our story in my own words. No script, no polish, just the raw truth. I talked about Dad, about Alina's wine bottle, about scraping rent together with coins from under the couch cushions. I told them why we were giving the money away. Because no one gave it to me when I needed it most. Within days, applications flooded in. Bakers, mechanics, artists, tiny stores squeezed between boarded-up buildings. Every story cracked me open a little more. I read them all. Some I read twice, 3 times, just to remind myself what we were fighting for. And Brand Holdings? They panicked. I knew they would. Nathan's lawyers sent me a letter, thinly veiled threats about defamation, slander, unfair business practices. Miriam read it over my shoulder and snorted. "They're scared." Good. I framed the letter and hung it on my office wall. The bigger we grew, the bolder I got. I went on live panels with other female founders. I gave a TEDx talk. God, my knees shook so badly I thought I'd collapse. But my voice didn't tremble. I spoke about survival, about being underestimated, about the power of saying no when the whole world tells you to bow. After that, the phone calls changed tone. Nathan's name showed up less. Alina's messages got colder, fewer, until they stopped altogether. It was like watching a dying star flicker out. But I wasn't naive. I knew they were planning something. People like Nathan didn't just walk away. They pivoted. They plotted. I didn't have to wait long to find out what it was. It was a Tuesday, gray, drizzling. I was in the middle of reviewing a new contract when my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in my gut twisted. I answered. "Miss Whitaker?" The voice was formal, clipped. A lawyer's voice. "Yes? This is Richard Chang with Klein & Rowe. I am calling regarding a suit filed this morning by Brandt Holdings against Thorn & Thread." My chest went cold. A suit? On what grounds? Breach of contract, misappropriation of trade secrets, and interference with client relationships. They're seeking damages in the low 7 figures. I almost laughed. Low 7 figures. Like they were doing me a favor. "Do I have representation?" I asked. "You do now," he said, dry as dust. "Your friend Jamie recommended me. We'll get through this. But you need to prepare yourself. This is going to be ugly." I hung up and sat in the quiet of my office. Outside, the rain blurred the glass, turning the city into watercolor. For a moment, the fear clawed at my throat. This was how they'd break me. Not with money, but with time, with endless legal fees, with pressure. Then I remembered Dad's voice. "Don't shout, Kala. Show." I stood up and pulled the framed threat letter off the wall. I held it in my hands and laughed. Really laughed. Until my stomach hurt. If they wanted a war, they'd get one. But it wouldn't look the way they expected. I called Miriam, told her what was happening. She didn't curse or panic. She just said, "We stand. Together." Jamie texted me half an hour later. "Let's burn their house down." Metaphorically, obviously. I spent that night writing the speech I'd deliver at our next investor meet. I made no promises of exponential profits. I talked about sustainability, community, the dirty tricks of giants who'd forgotten what it meant to build something real. I promised my people we'd fight every step of the way. In the days that followed, our inbox overflowed with messages of support. Former clients, tiny business owners, strangers who'd read my story online. A bakery from Belfast sent us a giant basket of scones with a note, "Keep going." A woman in Kansas mailed me a hand-knitted scarf, said it was her way of keeping me warm while I fought the cold. And I wore it. Every damn day. When the first court date came, I walked into that marble building with my head high, scarf wrapped tight around my throat like armor. Alina was there, of course, sitting behind Nathan, her face carved from marble. She didn't meet my eyes, but Nathan did, and I saw it there. Just a flicker, fear. Maybe he'd underestimated the weed that wouldn't die. The hearing was procedural, dry, legal language, echoing off stone walls. But when we stepped out onto the steps, there were cameras. Reporters. I'd always hated the attention. But that day, I stood in front of the microphones and told the truth. They want to silence us because we remind them what they used to be. Hungry, human, honest. We're not going anywhere. The headlines the next day were brutal. For them. Back at the office, my team toasted with cheap champagne. Miriam's kid threw confetti everywhere. Jamie hacked together a meme campaign that went viral in hours. A photo of a tiny weed bursting through concrete, our logo beneath it. We didn't win that day. But we didn't lose either. We endured. And sometimes enduring is the bravest thing you can do. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the scarf warm around my neck. I opened my laptop and pulled up the email that started it all. Nathan's first offer. I reread every line, every condescending phrase, every insult dressed as concern. And I smiled. Let them come. I wasn't done showing them who I'd become. When the first real wave of legal letters came in, I realized I'd underestimated the depth of Brandt Holdings' pockets. They weren't just trying to drain us with one lawsuit. They were filing in multiple jurisdictions, nitpicking every contract we'd ever signed, sending audit threats to our clients. It was a full court press, a show of force meant to corner me into surrender, but they didn't understand who I was anymore. In the first few weeks, I did what Dad would have done. I listened more than I spoke. Miriam and Jamie and Richard, my new lawyer, held daily calls, drafting responses, building our war chest. Richard had a poker face that could scare a ghost. He never raised his voice, but he made it clear. They're going to come at you until you break. So we make sure you don't break. Simple. Except it wasn't. My team was burning out. Miriam's kid got sick, and she was taking calls from the hospital waiting room. Jamie fell asleep during a strategy session and didn't wake up until I called his name 3 times. I made him take a week off, but I could see the guilt eating at him. And me? I was working 20 hours a day, surviving on coffee and spite. The day I really understood how far they'd go was the day I came home to find a strange envelope taped to my door. No return address. Inside was a photo of my apartment building, my window circled in red ink. Below it, a single line scribbled in Nathan's neat blocky handwriting. "You can still stop this." I should have been terrified. And for a second I was. But the fear gave way to rage, white hot and clean. I called Richard. He said what I needed to hear. Document it. Call the police. But don't run. This is your story to write. So I did. I took a picture of the envelope, the photo, the note. I posted it on our company socials with a simple caption: "We will not be bullied." It went viral in hours, hundreds of comments. Small business owners, single moms, young people trying to build something of their own. It struck a nerve. Suddenly, our fight wasn't just ours. It was bigger than Thorn and Thread. It was about what it means to build when the giants want you gone. Nathan's PR team scrambled. Alina texted me the next morning. "That was low, even for you," she wrote, like I'd staged the threat myself. I didn't bother to reply. She'd always been good at blaming the wrong people. Miriam showed up at my apartment that night with Eli and his stroller. She looked at the photo on my table and just shook her head. "You know this means they're desperate, right? They're afraid you'll win." I sat on my floor beside her, Eli gumming a plastic giraffe between us. "Then we keep going." We did. Every setback became a spark for something bigger. When another client dropped us under pressure, we launched a new package for startups. Lower fees, bigger reach, transparent pricing. Jamie called it the David package. Our slogan, "For the little guys who won't bow." It caught fire. Meanwhile, the lawsuits slogged on. Richard moved into my spare bedroom twice, just so we could prep filings late into the night. He kept telling me, "They're counting on you folding because you're tired." Every time he said it, I felt my spine straighten. I wouldn't fold. One Friday, a letter arrived that made me laugh out loud. Brandt Holdings wanted an out-of-court settlement. Of course they did. They were hemorrhaging PR points. Their stock price dipped every time my story made a headline. Investors were starting to ask questions. I told Richard, "No deal. We finished this in daylight." In the middle of that chaos, something unexpected happened. An old client, a tiny bookstore I'd built a website for back when Thorn and Thread was just me and a folding chair, called me. Kala, the owner, Mark, said, "We want to help. We're pooling money to cover some of your legal costs." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Mark, you can't." "We can," he cut me off. "You gave us a chance when no one else did. Now it's our turn." He wasn't alone. Within days, small donations started coming in. $20 from a coffee shop in Brighton, $100 from a tattoo artist in Brooklyn. Notes scribbled on crumpled receipts. I read every one. Some nights I fell asleep with my laptop still open, a hand on my chest, feeling that warmth spread through every exhausted bone in my body. Jamie caught me staring at the wall one morning. He tossed a granola bar at my head. "Don't you dare burn out on me now, Whitaker. We're too close." "Close to what?" I asked. He smirked. "Burning their whole legacy down." It was dark humor. But it kept us going. When the final hearing date came, I sat in that cold courtroom in my thrift store blazer and the scarf from Kansas. Alina sat behind Nathan, her expression unreadable. Maybe she'd realized that this wasn't the victory party she'd imagined. Nathan took the stand first. His lawyer tried to spin it. How Thorn and Thread had stolen proprietary methods. How we'd misled clients. I sat there, eyes steady, taking notes. When it was my turn, I stood tall. I told them about the wine bottle. About the night they left me with nothing but their pity. About how Thorn and Thread was built with scraps and stubbornness, and the belief that people like me, people who get told they'll never amount to anything, could thrive. The judge listened. The lawyers fumed. Nathan glared at me like he could set me on fire with his stare. When I stepped down, Miriam hugged me so tight I thought I'd break. Jamie just punched me lightly on the arm. "You did good, Whitaker. Real good." We waited weeks for the ruling. Every day felt like ice in my veins. Richard stayed calm. "We did everything right," he'd say, sipping his cold coffee like it was a magic potion. Trust the work. One gray afternoon, the email came. I read it once, then twice. My knees buckled, and I sat down hard on my office floor. We'd won. The judge threw out every claim. Brandt Holdings was ordered to pay our legal costs and issue a public apology. They didn't admit wrongdoing, giants never do, but the statement was enough. It said what I needed it to say. We couldn't be bought. We wouldn't be bullied. I posted a single photo. Our team standing outside the courthouse, arms around each other, grins wide, and tired. The caption read, "For everyone they said would never amount to anything, this is for you." The story went viral again, bigger than before. Investors, new clients, even old skeptics lined up at our door. But this time, we were ready. We didn't scale recklessly. We didn't let them carve us hollow. We grew like we always had. Roots first, flowers later. Alina tried to call. I didn't pick up. Nathan sent a last, desperate email offering double the first buyout figure. I laughed and archived it. One night, weeks after the case closed, I sat alone in my apartment. The city hummed below me, neon and raw. I thought about that first bottle of stolen wine, about the cold linoleum floor under my feet, about the weed no one bothered to rip out. And I realized, they hadn't just lost the buyout. They'd lost me forever. Before I shut down my laptop for the night, I opened a blank page. A plan. A new project. Bigger than thorn and thread. Something that could outgrow even me. If they wanted to buy me, they should have known. I was never for sale. And tomorrow, I'd show them again. Victory, they say, is the sweetest when it's tasted by those who were never supposed to get a seat at the table. But the truth is, that taste is complicated. Sharper than you expect, with an afterbite that lingers in your chest long after the headlines fade. After the verdict, the city felt different. Everywhere I went, people recognized me. At the corner coffee shop where I used to nurse one latte for hours just to get free Wi-Fi, the barista winked when she handed me my drink. "It's on the house today, Kala. We're proud of you." I wanted to laugh, to tell her how many times I'd hidden in the bathroom there just to cry without anyone seeing. But I just thanked her and slipped a big tip into the jar. I didn't want pity. I wanted roots. The real kind. Solid, unshakable. Back at the office. Our real office now, not just my living room. We were busier than ever. Miriam had moved her desk into a tiny sunlit nook. Eli's baby toys stacked neatly beside her computer. Jamie's whiteboard was covered with more arrows, post-its, and wild ideas than ever before. But success brought a different kind of weight. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of us. Venture capitalists with big checks and bigger egos sent offers every week. PR people wanted to package my story, polish the rough edges, soften the rage, make me a palatable poster child. One producer even called, suggesting a limited series about my underdog journey. Jamie almost fell out of his chair laughing when I told him. "Let them wait," he said, wiping his eyes. "They don't get you. They want you sanitized. We're not here to be sanitized." He was right. But the pressure kept building. Emails pinged my phone at all hours. Miriam caught me dozing at my desk more than once. She sat me down one morning, her eyes fierce. "You need to rest, Kala. You can't keep running on fumes. They'll take advantage of that." I knew she was right. But how do you rest when your whole life has been about proving you deserve to stand where you stand? Then came the letter. It was slipped under our office door on a rainy Thursday. I picked it up on my way in, juggling coffee and my bag. Plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a single page. Handwritten this time. The letters sharp, precise. Alina's handwriting. I would have known it anywhere. "You think you've won, but they never really let you in. You're still on the outside, Kala. You always will be." Binhi. No threat this time. No insult about my business. Just a knife, slid neatly under my ribs. I crumpled the letter and dropped it in the trash. But I couldn't unhear the words. The voice in my head that had whispered doubt for years suddenly roared back to life. That afternoon, I skipped the strategy meeting. I walked the neighborhood instead, past the old brick buildings and boarded up storefronts. I ended up back at the pier, the place Dad loved. The wind was cruel, the sea dark and endless. I stood there remembering his voice, his calloused hand wrapped around mine. "Don't shout, Kala. Show." Back then, I didn't understand what he meant. I thought showing meant being louder, stronger, unbreakable. But standing there, with the salt spray hitting my face, I realized what it really meant. It meant staying soft, too. Letting the world see the parts that weren't bulletproof. Because that's what scared people like Nathan and Alina the most. That you could be vulnerable and still refuse to bow. When I got back to the office, Jamie was waiting. He took one look at me and rolled his eyes. "Don't tell me you've been brooding at the pier again." I smiled. Had to. Needed to remember why I'm doing this. He nudged my shoulder. "Good, because we've got news. Big news. Victory, they say, is the sweetest when it's tasted by those who were never supposed to get a seat at the table. But the truth is, that taste is complicated. Sharper than you expect, with an afterbite that lingers in your chest long after the headlines fade. After the verdict, the city felt different. Everywhere I went, people recognized me. At the corner coffee shop where I used to nurse one latte for hours just to get free Wi-Fi, the barista winked when she handed me my drink. "It's on the house today, Kala. We're proud of you." I wanted to laugh, to tell her how many times I'd hidden in the bathroom there just to cry without anyone seeing. But I just thanked her and slipped a big tip into the jar. I didn't want pity. I wanted roots. The real kind. Solid, unshakable. Back at the office. Our real office now, not just my living room. We were busier than ever. Miriam had moved her desk into a tiny sunlit nook. Eli's baby toys stacked neatly beside her computer. Jamie's whiteboard was covered with more arrows, post-its, and wild ideas than ever before. But success brought a different kind of weight. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of us. Venture capitalists with big checks and bigger egos sent offers every week. PR people wanted to package my story, polish the rough edges, soften the rage, make me a palatable poster child. One producer even called, suggesting a limited series about my underdog journey. Jamie almost fell out of his chair laughing when I told him. "Let them wait," he said, wiping his eyes. "They don't get you. They want you sanitized. We're not here to be sanitized." He was right. But the pressure kept building. Emails pinged my phone at all hours. Miriam caught me dozing at my desk more than once. She sat me down one morning, her eyes fierce. "You need to rest, Kala. You can't keep running on fumes. They'll take advantage of that." I knew she was right. But how do you rest when your whole life has been about proving you deserve to stand where you stand? Then came the letter. It was slipped under our office door on a rainy Thursday. I picked it up on my way in, juggling coffee and my bag. Plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a single page. Handwritten this time. The letters sharp, precise. Alina's handwriting. I would have known it anywhere. "You think you've won, but they never really let you in. You're still on the outside, Kala. You always will be." Binhi. No threat this time. No insult about my business. Just a knife, slid neatly under my ribs. I crumpled the letter and dropped it in the trash. But I couldn't unhear the words. The voice in my head that had whispered doubt for years suddenly roared back to life. That afternoon, I skipped the strategy meeting. I walked the neighborhood instead, past the old brick buildings and boarded up storefronts. I ended up back at the pier, the place Dad loved. The wind was cruel, the sea dark and endless. I stood there remembering his voice, his calloused hand wrapped around mine. "Don't shout, Kala. Show." Back then, I didn't understand what he meant. I thought showing meant being louder, stronger, unbreakable. But standing there, with the salt spray hitting my face, I realized what it really meant. It meant staying soft, too. Letting the world see the parts that weren't bulletproof. Because that's what scared people like Nathan and Alina the most. That you could be vulnerable and still refuse to bow. When I got back to the office, Jamie was waiting. He took one look at me and rolled his eyes. "Don't tell me you've been brooding at the pier again." I smiled. Had to. Needed to remember why I'm doing this. He nudged my shoulder. "Good, because we've got news. Big news. I'd love to tell you that after Layla came on board, everything was smooth sailing, that thorn and thread became a fortress no one could breach. But that would be a lie. Growth is messy, and staying dangerous is even messier. Layla taught me early that when you get momentum, predators circle. Brand Holdings wasn't the only giant that felt threatened by us now. Other old money companies, the same ones that had once ignored our pitches and ghosted our proposals, started copying our playbook. They slapped our community grants with shinier names. They ran glossy ads with pretty stock photos of small business owners they'd never meet. They posted feel-good hashtags that meant nothing behind boardroom doors. It should have made me angry, and it did sometimes, but mostly it made me more determined. I knew the real story wasn't the copycats. It was the people no ad agency could buy. The roots. We tripled the Thorn Fund. Jamie built an entire branch of the company focused only on these programs. Miriam managed the chaos with spreadsheets so complex they made my eyes hurt. And me? I stepped into a new role. I became the face I'd once been too scared to show. Interviews, conferences, panels, places I'd once dreaded became battlegrounds I walked into with my shoulders back and my voice steady. One night, after a particularly brutal debate on live radio, some smooth-talking CEO had tried to paint us as reckless idealists. I got a text from Alina. 3 words. "You've changed, Kala." She didn't mean it as a compliment, but I took it as one. By then, Alina and I hadn't spoken in months. The buyout was ancient history now, but the crack in our relationship had become a canyon. She didn't understand who I was anymore. Or maybe she did, and that's what scared her. Nathan, though, hadn't given up. His company kept bleeding reputation points. They tried to pivot, new brand ambassadors, social impact stunts, even a grassroots listening tour. The headlines mocked them. More than once, they tried to recruit ex-Thorn and Thread staff. None of my people left. One by one, they told me why. Jamie said I'd rather die broke than be owned. Miriam said, "You fought for me when my kid was sick. That's worth more than any salary bump." Even the interns we brought on, kids who reminded me so much of myself, all nerves and bright ideas, stuck around because they saw what we were building. But all that loyalty came at a cost. We were working ourselves raw. I saw the toll in the dark circles under Miriam's eyes, the tremor in Jamie's hands, when he thought no one was looking. And me? I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, mind buzzing, with 1,000 tasks I'd never finish. Layla pulled me aside one day. "You're burning your people out, Kala," she said gently. "You can't be their savior and their executioner." It stung. But I listened. I had to. We brought in more staff. Delegated what I'd always been too afraid to hand over. Started mandatory mental health days. I made Miriam take 2 weeks off and threatened to change her Slack password if she so much as logged in. Jamie disappeared to some cabin up north for a week. He came back with a sunburn and a grin, and 10 new ideas that made my head spin. In the middle of this, an opportunity landed in my inbox that made my stomach flip. An international conference on social entrepreneurship. London, 3 days. Some of the biggest names in the world. They wanted me to speak on the opening panel. My first instinct was to say no. The voice in my head, the one that still sounded suspiciously like Alina sometimes, whispered, "You'll embarrass yourself. You're not polished enough, not respectable enough." But Jamie found the draft email. "If you don't say yes, I swear I'll forge your signature and book your ticket myself." So I went. I hadn't been back to Europe since college. London was cold and bright, glass skyscrapers rising alongside centuries-old stone. The conference center was a maze of corridors and sharp suits and expensive lanyards. I felt the old fear gnaw at my spine. But I'd learned to live with fear. Fear was proof I was still moving. Backstage before the panel, I paced like a caged cat. Layla was with me. She'd come as my +1, though I suspected she'd strong-armed the organizers into giving her a backdoor pass. "Remember," she said, "you're not here to be polite. You're here to be true." The moderator tried to put me in a box from the start. "Kala, some people say Thorn and Thread's radical transparency is unsustainable, that your grassroots model can't scale globally. What do you say to that?" I smiled, slow and sharp. "I say you're asking the wrong question. The right question is, why do we accept that honesty can't scale when exploitation does?" It landed. I saw the ripple move through the crowd. Some nods, some skeptical frowns. But that was the point. I wasn't there to be liked. I was there to plant something they couldn't dig up later. Afterward, young founders found me in the hallway, shy and wide-eyed. One woman from Poland said, "I didn't know we were allowed to do it like this." I wanted to hug her. I wanted to tell her we were all allowed, always. The next day, the headlines called me the thorn in the side of corporate greenwashing. Jamie printed it out and taped it to my office door when I got back. Miriam brought in a little plastic crown and set it on my desk. "For the Queen of Weeds," she said, deadpan. I wore it all day. Of course, the backlash came. Anonymous messages. Online trolls. An editorial in a major paper called me reckless and self-indulgent. Nathan's PR people released a statement calling Thorn and Thread an unsustainable stunt that would collapse under its own hubris. I'd read worse from my sister's wedding party. I took the crown off my desk and stuck it in my bag. Some nights I'd take it out at home and remind myself what it meant. You can grow anywhere if your roots are strong enough. Months blurred into seasons. The Thorn Fund doubled again. Our team tripled. We opened a satellite office in Edinburgh. Miriam moved there with her son and sent me photos of Eli building Lego castles under her new desk. Jamie started an in-house mentorship program for interns who'd never had anyone to show them how to stand up for their ideas. "No one gets to eat alone here," he said. "Not on my watch." Layla pushed me to think bigger. "What comes after this, Kala? You're not just a founder now. You're an ecosystem." At first, the word terrified me. Ecosystem. Like something too big to hold. But one night, sitting on my balcony with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and the city glowing below, I realized she was right. I had always been trying to prove to Alina I wasn't nothing, that I could become someone she'd have to respect. But that was too small now. My fight wasn't about her anymore. Or Nathan, or any of them. It was about what came next. So I did what I always do. I opened a blank page and wrote. A plan. A manifesto. A blueprint for the next 10 years. A network of microfunds in every city we could reach. Incubators. Community partnerships. Legal clinics for people fighting their own brand holdings. A living, breathing testament that you could be the weed and the soil. When I showed Jamie and Miriam, they just grinned. "You know this means more sleepless nights, right?" Jamie said. "Yeah," I said, closing my laptop. "But we'll sleep later. First, we grow." The plan was big. Too big, maybe, for the woman who once rationed packets of ramen while trying to code a website with a cracked screen. But that was the point. I'd outgrown every box they'd tried to put me in, and for the first time, I could see how far those roots could really go. We called it the Thorn Network, not an agency, not a company, an ecosystem. One that couldn't be bought out or buried, because it was made up of too many people to kill all at once. Our first pilot cities were obvious, the places that felt like home to me, even if I'd never lived there. Old port towns, rusted factories turned co-ops, neighborhoods fighting gentrification tooth and nail. Miriam took the Edinburgh hub and made it a community space. Not just desks and Wi-Fi, but childcare for single parents trying to start something. Free workshops, book clubs, legal drop-ins. She sent me photos of the mural they painted in the hallway, a massive vine of wild roses bursting through cracks in concrete. Jamie went south. Barcelona. He'd always wanted to live by the sea, he said. He texted me the day he found our new office, a crumbling storefront next to an ancient bakery that smelled like heaven. "This," he said on our first call, "is where we show them the weeds don't die, they bloom." Layla stayed close. She refused to be the fairy godmother who swoops in and disappears. Instead, she became the ghost in our machine, always there, always pushing us to ask bigger questions. She'd send me articles at 3 in the morning. "Read this, think about this, what comes after this?" Like a second heartbeat in the dark. Meanwhile, Nathan's people tried to spin their failure into something noble. Brand Holdings published a slick annual report bragging about community investments, thin copies of the Thorn Fund, dressed up in corporate PR speak. It didn't matter. The people we worked with could tell the difference. Authenticity can't be faked. Not forever. But even with our wins, I'd be lying if I said it was easy. The bigger we got, the more the old fear crept in. What if we couldn't keep up? What if we lost what made us different? What if Alina was right? That they'd never really let me in? It hit me hardest the night before our first global summit. We'd invited every Thorn Fund recipient who could make it, hundreds of dreamers from corners of the world I'd never stepped foot in. I was supposed to open the summit with a keynote. It should have felt like a victory lap. Instead, I sat backstage, staring at my reflection in a dressing room mirror covered in sticky notes from Jamie. "Don't suck. You got this. If you bomb, at least look hot doing it." My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I should have known not to open it, but I did. A single sentence. "They're still laughing at you, you know." The plan was big. Too big, maybe, for the woman who once rationed packets of ramen while trying to code a website with a cracked screen. But that was the point. I'd outgrown every box they'd tried to put me in, and for the first time, I could see how far those roots could really go. We called it the Thorn Network, not an agency, not a company, an ecosystem. One that couldn't be bought out or buried, because it was made up of too many people to kill all at once. Our first pilot cities were obvious, the places that felt like home to me, even if I'd never lived there. Old port towns, rusted factories turned co-ops, neighborhoods fighting gentrification tooth and nail. Miriam took the Edinburgh hub and made it a community space. Not just desks and Wi-Fi, but childcare for single parents trying to start something. Free workshops, book clubs, legal drop-ins. She sent me photos of the mural they painted in the hallway, a massive vine of wild roses bursting through cracks in concrete. Jamie went south. Barcelona. He'd always wanted to live by the sea, he said. He texted me the day he found our new office, a crumbling storefront next to an ancient bakery that smelled like heaven. This, he said on our first call, is where we show them the weeds don't die, they bloom. Layla stayed close. She refused to be the fairy godmother who swoops in and disappears. Instead, she became the ghost in our machine, always there, always pushing us to ask bigger questions. She'd send me articles at 3 a.m. Read this, think about this, what comes after this? Like a second heartbeat in the dark. Meanwhile, Nathan's people tried to spin their failure into something noble. Brandt Holdings published a slick annual report bragging about community investments, thin copies of the Thorn Fund, dressed up in corporate PR speak. It didn't matter. The people we worked with could tell the difference. Authenticity can't be faked. Not forever. But even with our wins, I'd be lying if I said it was easy. The bigger we got, the more the old fear crept in. What if we couldn't keep up? What if we lost what made us different? What if Alina was right? That they'd never really let me in? It hit me hardest the night before our first global summit. We'd invited every Thorn Fund recipient who could make it, hundreds of dreamers from corners of the world I'd never stepped foot in. I was supposed to open the summit with a keynote. It should have felt like a victory lap. Instead, I sat backstage, staring at my reflection in a dressing room mirror covered in sticky notes from Jamie. Don't suck. You got this. If you bomb, at least look hot doing it. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I should have known not to open it, but I did. A single sentence. They're still laughing at you, you know. I didn't have to ask who she meant. Yeah. Layla exhaled smoke into the cold. Let her. She can watch. She can whisper all she wants. But you don't owe her the sound of your voice anymore. I smiled, my breath misting in the dark. When did you stop listening to yours? She laughed, low and sharp. Who says I ever did? That night I went back to my hotel room and wrote Alina a letter. I didn't send it. I didn't need to. I just wrote what I'd wanted to say for years. You were right. I never amounted to anything you'd understand. But I became everything I needed to be. And that's enough. Back home, our next battles waited. Rent hikes. New city contracts. Copycats. Board members who wanted to streamline our vision. Code for watering us down. But every challenge came with something bigger. People. New stories. New routes. And every time we started to bend under the weight, I'd open that box of old letters. Scones from Belfast, scarves from Kansas, scraps of hope scribbled on gas station receipts. In the end, it wasn't me they couldn't buy. It was the faith people put in each other when they saw someone stand their ground. We kept growing. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow. We kept giving. We stayed dangerous. And I stayed exactly what I was meant to be. A thorn they'd never pull out. I didn't have to ask who she meant. Yeah. Layla exhaled smoke into the cold. Let her. She can watch. She can whisper all she wants. But you don't owe her the sound of your voice anymore. I smiled, my breath misting in the dark. When did you stop listening to yours? She laughed, low and sharp. Who says I ever did? That night I went back to my hotel room and wrote Alina a letter. I didn't send it. I didn't need to. I just wrote what I'd wanted to say for years. You were right. I never amounted to anything you'd understand. But I became everything I needed to be. And that's enough. Back home, our next battles waited. Rent hikes. New city contracts. Copycats. Board members who wanted to streamline our vision. Code for watering us down. But every challenge came with something bigger. People. New stories. New routes. And every time we started to bend under the weight, I'd open that box of old letters. Scones from Belfast, scarves from Kansas, scraps of hope scribbled on gas station receipts. In the end, it wasn't me they couldn't buy. It was the faith people put in each other when they saw someone stand their ground. We kept growing. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow. We kept giving. We stayed dangerous. And I stayed exactly what I was meant to be. A thorn they'd never pull out. When I got back from the summit, the city felt smaller. Or maybe I just felt bigger, heavier in my bones, with the weight of what we'd built. That first Monday back, I unlocked the office before dawn. The sun hadn't even made it over the rooftops yet, but I needed to feel the quiet, to stand in the center of that cluttered, humming space and remember that it was real. Miriam's desk was covered in sticky notes and half-finished grant applications. Jamie's whiteboard was a mess of ideas for new outreach programs. Mentorship for kids aging out of foster care, free tech workshops for seniors, pop-up collectives for immigrant artisans. On the wall near the door, someone had hung up the crown they gave me after my London talk. It looked ridiculous there, balanced on a thumbtack like a child's forgotten toy. But it made me smile, because that's what all of this was. A reminder that the things they mock you for are the same things that make you unbreakable. A few hours later, the team trickled in. Jamie, hair wet from the rain, carrying pastries from the bakery downstairs. Miriam, half awake, with Eli trailing behind her in his Spider-Man backpack. Layla, video calling from her kitchen in Maine, sipping black coffee while she quizzed me on the next 3 months' projections like a hawk with a spreadsheet. "How do you feel?" Miriam asked when we all settled into the conference room. "Like I'm standing on a cliff edge," I said honest, "but I like the view." We laughed, but the truth was, we all knew what was waiting. Growth attracts parasites. Opportunists. Alina's words still lived in the back of my mind. They never really let you in. Maybe she was right. But we didn't need in. We'd built our own door. The next big test came faster than I expected. A city developer showed up at our Edinburgh hub one morning with a clipboard and a condescending grin. They wanted to renegotiate our lease. Code 4, "We want your space because it's worth more now that you made it worth something." Miriam called me mid-meeting, her voice shaking with quiet fury. "They're trying to push us out, Kala. Everything we've built here, gone." "No," I said, already flipping through our files. "They're not taking a damn thing. We could have fought it in court. We could have begged for a special extension, gathered petitions. But that was the old way, the way they counted on. Instead, we did what we always did. We showed." Within 48 hours, we turned the Edinburgh Hub's social feeds into a living timeline of what that space meant. Photos of community dinners, free coding classes for local kids, single moms holding business licenses they'd registered right there at our folding tables. The posts exploded. Local news outlets picked it up. Suddenly, the developer wasn't dealing with one scrappy nonprofit. They were fighting hundreds of families and business owners who saw our hub as their second home. By Friday, they backed off. The landlord renewed our lease for 5 years at the same rate. I sat in my tiny office that night, watching the rain hit the windows, the crown balanced on my shelf. I felt like I was 10 again, standing on the pier beside Dad, learning that the tide always comes in, but you can stand your ground. Of course, the wind didn't stop the next wave. A new legal notice came from a shell company we'd never heard of. Some offshore LLC claiming our community brand infringed on a trademark they'd acquired. Richard, my lawyer, looked at the paperwork and just sighed. "They're getting smarter," he said. "This is about exhausting you." "Then let them be exhausted first," I told him. "We'll fight every dirty trick with truth in daylight." We did, and each time our community doubled down. A bakery in Belfast baked us a "We Are Not For Sale" cake and sent us photos. An old bookstore in Dublin started giving out Thorn Network bookmarks for free, each one stamped with our logo like a secret handshake. Even Alina's barbs couldn't touch me the same way anymore. She'd text at odd hours. "You look tired on camera. Maybe you're in over your head." Once, she sent a photo of her new beach house. A sprawling, sterile palace with a glass facade that looked like it had never heard a child's laughter. No note attached. Just the image. Proof, I guess, that she still wanted me to know she was winning in her own way. but her version of winning felt cold and hollow. My version was messy and loud and rooted in people who showed up even when the tide rose high. One night, Jamie found me passed out at my desk. He nudged me awake, eyebrows raised. "You need to sleep." "Can't?" I mumbled. "If I sleep, they get ahead." "If you don't sleep," he said, "we lose you. And we're not Thorn without you, Whitaker." So I went home. I curled up in bed, the scarf from Kansas draped over my shoulders like armor. I dreamed of the pier, Dad's laugh, the smell of the sea. When I woke up, the sun was coming up over the city, gilding the skyline in gold. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Alina. "Well, this is a surprise," she said. Her voice was syrupy, the way it always was when she wanted to sound like the reasonable one. "I want you to stop," I said. "No pleasantries. No excuses. I know you're feeding these attacks, the shell companies, the fake trademark claims, the whispers." Silence. Then a low, mocking laugh. "You think I'm behind all that?" "That's paranoid, Calla. Maybe you're just in over your head." "You said I'd never amount to anything," I said, my voice steady. "I didn't believe you then, and I sure as hell don't believe you now. I just wanted you to hear it from me before your husband's empire collapses under its own greed." "Nathan isn't the villain you think he is," she snapped. "He's smart enough to know when to cut his losses. Maybe you should do the same." "He's not cutting me down," I said before hanging up. "And neither are you." I sat in my apartment afterward, staring out at the city. She'd been my ghost for so long, whispering doubt into every good thing I built. But ghosts only have power if you feed them. From that day on, I stopped feeding her. We kept fighting. We kept growing. The Thorn network sprouted new shoots in places I'd never even been. Berlin, Lisbon, Detroit, tiny towns tucked between highways. Each hub looked different. Each one carried the same heartbeat. People who knew that roots crack concrete. Some days, I still woke up afraid. But fear, I learned, is just the price of building something no one can bulldoze. In the end, that's what kept me going. Not the victory, but the fight. Not the crown on my shelf, but the weeds breaking through the cracks. And the promise that when the tide came in, we'd stand our ground. Together, always. Wish too could say that after I stopped feeding the ghost of Alina, she disappeared completely. But ghosts have a way of slipping under locked doors and rattling windows when you're least expecting it. That fall, Brandt Holdings took another blow. Nathan was forced to step down after a leaked memo exposed the extent of their quote community partnerships. Fake charities funneling money back into executive bonuses. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. I was at the Edinburgh hub for a surprise visit, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Miriam and a group of new grant recipients. We were reviewing pitches for local food co-ops when Jamie burst in, phone in hand, eyes wide. "Guess who's trending?" he said, shoving the screen at me. I skimmed the article once. Twice. My pulse didn't spike the way I thought it would. Instead, I felt something like grief. Grief for what we could have been if Nathan and Alina had chosen differently. Grief for all the people crushed under their boots before we fought back. "He'll land on his feet," Miriam said. "They always do." "Maybe," I said. "But now the mask's off, people remember that." The truth was, I'd stopped needing them to lose for me to win. Our fight had grown so much bigger than their boardrooms and glass towers. We'd built something they couldn't buy. Something they couldn't even understand. Still, the press wanted my reaction. Reporters called non-stop. One camped outside the hub for 2 days. They wanted me to gloat, to dance on Nathan's professional grave. But that wasn't the story I wanted to tell. When I finally spoke, I did it my way. I posted a photo of our Edinburgh mural, roses bursting through concrete, and captioned it with 3 words: "Roots run deep." No interviews, no sound bites, just the truth. But behind the scenes, the fallout rippled. Former Brandt clients came knocking, contracts in hand, begging to join the Thorn network. Big money, big brands, the kinds of deals I'd once dreamed of when I was eating stale bread, just to keep the lights on. I sat with Miriam and Jamie for hours, reviewing the offers. Jamie kept making gagging sounds every time a slick agency name popped up. "These people ghosted you, Calla," he said. "They'd have sold your bones for spare change if it made Nathan happy. And now they're broke, Miriam added. Now they see you're not just a weed, you're a whole forest. She was right. I turned down 90% of the offers. But one or two small brands slipped through. Local places that had once been tied to Brandt's machine, but never wanted to be. We took them in carefully, one by one, and made them ours. Amid the chaos, Alina stayed silent. No texts, no snide notes, no blurry photos of her latest trophy house. But I knew she was watching. I could feel her eyes on every headline, every post, every viral quote. Sometimes I wondered what she told herself. That I'd gotten lucky? That I'd betrayed her by becoming the kind of woman she could never control? But I didn't waste too much time trying to decode her. She'd had her chance to stand beside me. She'd chosen the glass towers instead. One rainy night I found myself back at the pier where Dad used to take me. The wind slapped at my cheeks, cold enough to cut. I stood there with the scarf from Kansas wrapped around my neck, imagining him beside me, hands stuffed in his old bomber jacket, salt on his boots. "You see this, Dad?" I whispered. "Your stubborn kid did all right." In my mind, he didn't say much. He just smiled, proud and quiet, the way he always did when he didn't have the words. When I got back to the city, we launched the next phase of the Thorn Network, seed hubs. Tiny satellite spaces in towns most people skip on the map. Pop-up co-working spaces in abandoned storefronts. Mobile legal clinics run out of refitted vans. Places for people who didn't know they were allowed to dream yet. The idea came from an email I'd gotten months before, from a teenager in a farming town in rural Ohio. He'd written, "There's nothing here for kids like me. I don't want to leave home to chase my ideas. I want to build them here." So we built them. We made sure no one had to leave their roots behind just to grow. Jamie called it the thorn under the floorboards. Every time a giant thought they'd killed us, another shoot sprouted up where they weren't looking. "Death by 1,000 roots," he joked, drawing it on the whiteboard with doodles of weeds cracking marble floors. Not everyone understood what we were doing. Some people said we were spreading ourselves too thin. "Consolidate," the new investors urged. "Protect the brand, keep it clean." But I'd stopped caring about clean a long time ago. Life wasn't clean. Hope wasn't clean. Weeds weren't clean. One afternoon, at our Detroit pop-up, I sat on a folding chair, listening to a group of single moms brainstorm a shared kitchen co-op. They were arguing over whose mother-in-law made the best pierogi recipe. One of them turned to me mid-rant and said, "You really think we can do this, Kala?" I laughed. "You're already doing it, I'm just here to watch." That night, Alina's ghost came knocking again. A letter slipped under my apartment door. Handwritten, like she always did when she wanted to hurt me most. This time, though, the words surprised me. "You're not who I thought you'd be." Maybe I'm not either. No signature, no address, no demands. I sat on my kitchen floor, letter in hand, trying to feel something. Rage, vindication, sorrow. But what came was relief. Maybe she was still standing behind her glass walls. But maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see the cracks. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Instead, I went back to my people, my team, my roots. Because that was the only thing that ever mattered. We kept going. We kept giving. We stayed dangerous. And when the next giant came for us, and they always did, we were ready. One thorn, then another, then 1,000, until the concrete broke. The crown on my shelf stayed there, gathering dust. I'd never need it again. Because the real crown was in every storefront we reopened. Every mom who whispered, "I didn't know I could." Every kid who grew up knowing they didn't have to bow. That was the buyout I'd never take. The legacy they'd never own. That was enough for me. Somewhere along the way, people started calling me a founder, a CEO, a visionary. Titles that had once sounded like jokes when I was squatting on the floor of my Matchbox apartment. Coding until my eyes went blurry. But the truth was I never felt like any of those things. Not really. I was a gardener, maybe. Or a weed. Or the wind that carried seeds to places they weren't supposed to grow. That winter, the Thorn Network faced its biggest storm yet. The seed hubs were multiplying so fast that even our expanded board started to balk. Investors we'd once trusted called emergency meetings. "We're losing control," they said. "We're not a charity, we're a business." I sat across the table from men in custom suits, their polished shoes tapping anxiously under the conference table, and I realized they'd never really believed in the roots. They wanted a good story, one they could polish and sell, but they didn't want the mess that came with real community power. "You can't keep throwing money at these towns," one of them said, voice strained. What's the ROI on a pop-up legal clinic in the middle of nowhere? I looked him in the eye, steady. Hope. Dignity. A kid who grows up knowing they're not alone. He scoffed. That's not measurable. Then measure the cracks we leave behind when we give up. Jamie sat beside me, fighting a grin. He never did well with polite rooms. Miriam zoomed in from Edinburgh, her son painting at a table in the background. She listened to every word, her jaw tight. If you don't like the way we do things, Jamie said to the suits, go invest in someone else's dream. This one's not for sale. In the days after that meeting, the board fractured. Some of the old money pulled out. Headlines screamed that the Thorn Network was in crisis. Founder overextends. Grassroots empire on verge of collapse. Nathan's ghost of a company tried to swoop in with fresh offers, dangling partnerships like bait. I didn't flinch. We weren't dying. We were pruning. We called a town hall. Every hub leader, every volunteer, every single person who'd ever scraped together bus fare to come to a Thorn event. We didn't hide the struggle. We laid it all out. The costs, the risks, the betrayals, and we asked them what they wanted. They wanted more. A baker in Dublin said, we'll fundraise for the legal clinic ourselves. Just give us the blueprint. A tattoo artist in Detroit offered up his shop's basement for a new co-working space. A farmers market collective in Sheffield pledged a share of their profits to the seed fund. They didn't ask me for permission. They just did it. Layla called me that night. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Not to be needed forever. I laughed, tears hot behind my eyes. Yeah, I guess it is. For the first time, I saw the shape of what Thorn could become. Something that didn't need me at its center. Something that could grow long after I was gone. But the world doesn't like a good thing left unchallenged. The same week our people rallied, Alina reappeared. Not in a text, not in a letter, but in the flesh. She showed up at the Edinburgh hub, unannounced. Miriam texted me a photo. My sister in a designer coat that probably cost more than our monthly rent, standing in front of the mural of roses like she'd planted them herself. She wants a meeting, Miriam wrote. Your call. I didn't owe her my time. But ghosts deserve to be seen in daylight. So I flew out that weekend. The sky over Scotland was the same cold pewter I remembered from my first visit. I found Alina sitting alone in the cafe next to the hub, her manicured fingers drumming the table. You've made quite the mess, she said when I sat down. I didn't rise to the bait. You didn't come all this way to insult me. What do you want? She looked older than I remembered, not in the lines on her face, but in the hollowness behind her eyes. Nathan's done. They're tearing him apart. They want to make me the face now. The clean Brant name. I need you to back off. I stared at her. You think I'm doing this to spite you? Aren't you? She snapped. All this, she gestured wildly. This fairy tale about weeds and roots. You think it hurts me, but it just makes you look naive. They'll chew you up, Kala. They always do. I leaned back, calm. They've been trying. For years. And I'm still here. Her mask cracked for half a heartbeat. I was trying to protect you. I almost laughed. By telling me I'd never amount to anything? By trying to buy me out? Break me down? She flinched. You were supposed to let it go. Get married, be safe. You were never built for this fight. I looked her in the eye and saw the truth. She believed that. She'd always believed that safety was worth any cage. She'd built hers so carefully she didn't know she'd locked herself inside. I was built for it, I said. Dad knew. I know. And the people standing behind me, they know too. Alina's shoulders slumped. For a moment, she was just my sister again, tired and alone. What if they win? Then we grow back, I said. That's what weeds do. I stood to leave. She didn't try to stop me. Back at the hub, Miriam hugged me so hard I almost fell over. Jamie called from Barcelona. So, how'd it go? She's not our problem anymore, I said. He snorted. She never was. We pushed forward. We restructured the board, shut the door on the investors who only cared about the numbers. We doubled down on the community votes. One person, one share, one voice. No kingmakers. No secret deals. People said it wouldn't work, that we'd get swallowed by bigger fish, that we'd drown in our own idealism. But every week, someone sent me proof they were wrong. A thank you note from a woman who used our grant to open her first bakery. A kid's crayon drawing of our logo taped to the window of a pop-up library in Manchester. A message from an old fisherman's widow who said she felt less alone knowing we were there. At night, I still wore the scarf from Kansas when the world felt too sharp. I kept the crown on my shelf, dusty and cracked. I liked it better that way. Proof that thrones rust, but roots don't. And when the new tide came, and it always came, I didn't shout. I showed. They say when you build something from the bones of your own struggle, you're always one heartbeat away from burning out. I never fully believed that until the winter after Alina and I faced each other for the last time. The Edinburgh hub was thriving. Miriam's mural was now a local landmark, kids from the neighborhood adding new roses every few weeks like living graffiti. Jamie's Barcelona seed hub was somehow both chaotic and organized. Pop-up co-ops, tiny startups sprouting in alleys, coffee shop meetings at dawn. And in Detroit, the basement kitchen turned co-working space for single moms was feeding more families than I'd ever dreamed. But the bigger we grew, the more invisible fires I had to put out. Legal skirmishes, PR battles, small betrayals that stung like paper cuts but threatened to become mortal wounds if we didn't handle them right. One night, I fell asleep at my desk, my old, battered laptop humming in the dark. I woke to my phone buzzing, Miriam's face on the screen. "Kala," she said, voice urgent. "Did you see the news?" A new exposé. Some old associate of Brand Holdings, one of the ones we'd refused, was claiming the Thorn Network was a cult of personality built around me. That our community grants were financially reckless. They'd found someone willing to swear we doctored numbers to make ourselves look like saviors. "It's a smear job," Jamie said when we called him in. "They're losing again. This is the only card they have left." But I felt the fear creep in anyway. I remembered being 23, sitting on that linoleum floor, Alina's voice in my ear. "They'll laugh at you. They'll break you." This was the laugh. This was the break. Except it didn't land the way they'd hoped. I wrote a statement. No lawyers, no spin, just me. I talked about the night I built the first Thorn and Thread site with nothing but cheap wine and a secondhand laptop. I talked about every single person who'd held this thing together with the scraps of their own hope. And then I turned the mic around. "Ask the people who've been here," I wrote. "Ask the bakery in Belfast, the bookstore in Dublin, the coder in Detroit. Ask the single moms feeding each other's kids. They'll tell you what we are." They did. The community flooded every comment section, every news article. They shared receipts, photos of storefronts, grant checks, kids' art classes, and borrowed basements. The smear campaign fizzled like wet paper. The more they tried to paint us as a cult, the more people wanted to join. Layla called me that night. "They can't kill a weed, Kala, not one with roots like this." But the stress still dug deep. I got sick. Nothing dramatic, just my body saying enough. I spent 3 days in bed, scarf from Kansas draped over me, watching the skyline blur through my window. I let Miriam and Jamie run the show, and the world didn't end. If anything, it flourished. When I came back, our team handed me a letter. Not from Alina. She was quiet now. It was from a young woman named Priya in London. She'd used one of our microgrants to open a sewing co-op for immigrants who couldn't afford childcare. She'd included photos. Kids napping on blankets while mothers hemmed wedding dresses by hand. "You didn't just help us," she wrote. "You showed us we're allowed to help each other." I pinned that letter to the corkboard above my desk, a new kind of crown. With that strength, we launched the next phase, Roots and Wings. A mentorship pipeline for teenagers. So they wouldn't have to wait until adulthood to learn that you can build something instead of begging for scraps. Jamie designed the logo, a weed with tiny wings at the tips of its leaves. The new hubs bloomed fast. Lisbon, Warsaw, a converted bus depot in Manchester turned into a weekend market for young artisans. Every new city brought new headaches, zoning fights, petty bribes, people who showed up for the photo ops but ghosted when it was time to work. But every time it got heavy, I'd walk into a hub unannounced and sit with whoever was there. I'd listen to a kid pitch his gaming startup, or a grandmother talk about turning her backyard into a community garden. I'd watch Miriam teach a single mom how to file her first invoice, or Jamie lead a brainstorming session on the sidewalk with chalk and bad coffee. This was what Alina would never see, that the mess was the point, that the cracks were where the roots went in. One evening, when the Manchester Depot hosted its first youth market, I stood outside and watched the kids hang handmade signs from the rafters. A boy about 16 sidled up next to me. "You're Kala, right?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Who are you?" He shrugged. "Nobody. But I'm gonna be." "You already are," I told him. Back in my apartment that night, I pulled out the old buyout email from Nathan. It had yellowed with age, an artifact now. I printed it, framed it, and stuck it next to the scarf and the crown. My small museum of reasons to keep going. Miriam caught me staring at that wall once during a video call. "Thinking about the old days?" she asked. "No," I said. "Thinking about what's next." "Next," Jamie said from off-screen, "is bigger, dirtier, more annoying, and way more beautiful." He was right. I still had no illusions that we'd ever be safe. We were too wild for that. There'd always be another Brant, another Alina, another boardroom that wanted us to kneel. That every time the tide came in, we'd stand our ground. And if they paved over us, we'd crack the concrete again. That was the promise. That was the gift. I used to think the story was about proving my sister wrong, or proving I could never be bought, or proving I was worth something. But in the end, it was simpler than that. It was about showing. Always showing. And letting the roots do the rest. When I look back now, I think about the moments that didn't make headlines. The cracked linoleum floor, the stale bread dinners, the knock on the door that never came when I needed help the most. I think about Dad's quiet faith and Alina's razor words, and how they both carved the same thing into my spine. Don't shout. Show. By the time the Thorn Network hit its 10th year, we'd spread to more than 50 cities, some big, some so small they didn't appear on glossy maps. We had legal clinics in old laundromats, art studios in abandoned warehouses, community gardens blooming in vacant lots. And we had stories, thousands of them, scraps of courage stitched together by people who never thought they were allowed to dream. The fight never stopped. It just changed shape. Nathan's company had been sold off for parts years ago, a cautionary tale for boardrooms that thought buying hope was the same as growing it. But new giants rose up to take their place. Shiny logos, slick slogans about community and impact that meant nothing when the ink dried. They came for us like they always did. Politely at first, then with teeth. Fake grant offers designed to hollow us out. Smear campaigns that fell apart when they hit our walls of truth. One time, they even tried to clone our brand, Thorn and Thread Local, run out of some corporate skyscraper by people who'd never eaten ramen for dinner 3 nights in a row. It almost made me laugh, almost, because every time they copied us, they proved the point. Roots are easy to envy, but they can't be built from the top down. They have to start in the dirt. When the attacks came, I didn't stand alone. I didn't have to. Miriam was still at the Edinburgh hub, now training a new generation of directors. Jamie moved from Barcelona to Lisbon to open our first Thorn School, a pilot for teenagers who didn't fit the standard mold and didn't want to. Layla, older now, called me every week from her porch overlooking the bay, asking her favorite question, "What comes after this?" What came after was never one thing. It was a kid in Kansas who used a microgrant to build a skate park behind an abandoned strip mall. It was a grandmother in Belfast who opened a soup kitchen with her pension and refused to shut it down when city inspectors threatened fines. It was a queer artist in Warsaw who painted the first mural in a neighborhood that had banned public art for decades. Every time they told us it won't last, we lasted. Every time they said, "You'll break," we bent and sprang back stronger. And Alina? She became the ghost she'd once been in my head. Every few years, she sent a postcard. Never an email, never a text. Just a line or two. The last one came from a wellness retreat in Bali. It read, "Are you tired yet?" I didn't reply. But if I had, I'd have told her the truth. Yes. I was tired. Bone tired some nights. But I was never alone. And the roots were stronger than anything she'd ever built behind her glass walls. That year, on the anniversary of our first hub, we held a gathering at the pier Dad used to love. I stood there, older now, the salt wind tangling my hair. I thought about that Matchbox apartment, about the cracked laptop, the bottle of wine Alina once stole, the pity in Nathan's voice when he offered to buy me out. If they could see me now, they'd still think they didn't lose. People like them always twist the truth to survive it. But they were wrong. They'd lost the day I realized I didn't have to play their game. That I could write new rules on the back of my own scars. Kids played tag on the pier, while parents traded stories about rent strikes and shared harvests. Miriam's son, now 12, helped set up tables for donated food. Jamie made a toast with cheap cider from the corner shop. To the weeds, he said. The ones they'll never pull out. I felt the words like a warmth in my chest. I'd spent so long trying to be someone they couldn't buy. Now I knew the truth. They'd never been able to afford me. Before the night ended, I took a walk to the edge of the dock. The tide was coming in, swallowing the pylons one by one. I remembered Dad's voice. I remembered how he'd told me the ocean could swallow anything that didn't stand its ground. We stood our ground. When the stars came out, I pulled out my phone and typed one last message to the people who'd been with me since that first cracked website. The single moms, the baristas, the bakers and coders and kids with paper crowns, the ones who believed that a weed could grow too wild to die. They said we'd never amount to anything. Maybe they were right. Maybe we amounted to everything they couldn't buy. Celebrate. I hit send. I let the wind take the rest. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.